The slides are on the test. Nothing from today other than the four risks, which we've already looked at, is on the test. Less can't is on the test. And you already know that. So like less can't should be 7 points free. So what is less can't, Emily? Language.
Environment.
Yep. Don't look down.
So.
Social organization. She can stop there. Okay. And Carrie, you want to pick it up?
Contexting.
Good. Okay. What's the A? Authority. And everybody's looking down. Nonverbal behavior and the understanding of time or temperature. Okay, so we'll go over that. But the content of that's not there, just what the acronym is for. That is not in the book, because that is in fact what that's my area. So, and you know, I don't know, it sounds stupid or maybe bragging or something, but I created that field. It wasn't a field. The first place that was a regularly offered course, intercultural communication, business communication, is at this university, which is kind of fun. Regularly offered. I also am going to tell you that in the book, definitions from the book are game. So if I said, what is an SWF, which is one of the things that was in the book that I expect you to read, but we didn't discuss. What is an SWF? Sovereign Wealth Fund. Right. Okay, so what is a sovereign wealth fund? You got the answer correctly, so somebody else can give the, what is a sovereign wealth fund? Okay, I'm not going to answer it. What I'm going to say is that if you don't know what that is, that's the kind of thing that will be on the test. It's the kind of thing that's in the margin on the book. It has like a page dedicated to it in the book. And that's the kind of thing you would expect to be on the test. Not what is the gross national product of France in 1960. But you might want to know who the big three were in 1960, since we spent a lot of time on that. So who were the big three? The big three economies were over half of the world economy. Who were they?
U.S., Germany, and France.
No.
Oh,
Good start. U.S., blank, and France.
UK.
U.S., UK, and France, and in that order. Okay. Now France and Britain, France and the UK are still in the top economies, but they're no longer even in the top 5. They're 6 and 8, I think. I don't remember exactly. They're both 3% of the world economy. They're 6 and 7. That varies. But they used to be the biggest. By 2000, who were the big 3 economies? Actually, by 1985, even, who were the big 3 economies? U.S., Japan, and Germany. Okay, only a few years ago, you were still in high school probably when this happened, there was a shift. And for the first time, other than the U.S., which is still number 1, okay, 2 non-European, non-Western powers are the 2nd and 3rd largest economies. Who are they? Japan and China. In what order?
Japan first.
Not now. China is now the 2nd largest. This is a big issue in Japan. And if you follow Japanese politics, as I do, they have a guy, Prime Minister named Shinzo Abe, who is trying to do something about this. And China is responding in kind. But Japan has finally gotten its act back together. It will be an interesting thing to see. Yes, ma'am, Courtney.
You said the recent change was U.S., China, Japan?
It's U.S., China, Japan. That's right. It was U.S., Japan, China. And only in less than a decade back, it was the U.S., Japan, Germany. So we've got a real shift going on. Has anyone ever heard of Fareed Zakaria? Yeah, okay. He's a journalist for Time. He's also a very learned man in a lot of other ways. He wrote a book called The Post-American World. If this stuff interests you, you might want to take a look, especially if you're interested, say, in China or India. he talked about the shift, and it's a very, very good book. It's not that the U.S. has declined. In fact, has the U.S. gross national product gone down in real terms or up, or stayed the same?
Up.
It's gone up and significantly up. However, the he calls a term I like, the rise of the rest. I like that. It's not the decline of the U.S., it's the rise of the rest. It's not the decline of Britain or France, by the way, which are bigger than they were in 1960 by a lot. It's just that what they produce is a smaller percentage as countries such as China, with its huge population, and India, with its huge population, start to actually industrialize and raise towards the middle class. Now, India's still got a ways to go, but India's middle class is larger than the whole United States population. While still the majority of the Chinese cannot count as middle class is determined by the United Nations at $4,000 US a year, which is not middle class by US standard. And China didn't even make that number, despite all its wealth. Because one of the things we have is an enormous amount of Chinese who haven't gotten into this build. But China's middle class by US standard is also much larger than the US. Procter & Gamble, General Motors, make more money in China than they do in the United States. So even as you are a major US company in a major US place, in the major US market, you still start to look. Walmart, for all its competitiveness, almost 80%, just under 80% of Walmart's products are made in China. Now that's Walmart. That's not everything. Walmart has a special relationship with China. But Walmart is the world's largest retailer and is the largest company in the United States. It employs more people than the next 3 Fortune 500 companies combined. That's a major force. Now, there are issues going on, but that's part of what we're looking at when we see these charts. And you answer correctly, because I'll ask you a question like, did U.S. gross national product decline? And the answer is no. Or I'll say, did U.S. gross national product rise? And you'll say, yes. I want you to be able to do true or false, multiple choice, or fill in the blank, like which were the 3 top economies in 1960, which are the 3 top economies now, in rank order. And you can fill that in just like we did. What is the Sovereign Wealth Fund? Or maybe I'll say, what is SWF? And you can pick it out. Or I'll say the definition, and you can pick it out of a lineup. That's what the test is. And you should do really well on it because it's not that hard. We didn't even cover all the material I thought we might cover, which is fine with me. I'd rather we get discussions going, and even if I get off a little, I think you're getting something, I hope. Several of you have said that, but I want to hear also from the ones who think you're not. I've got some good suggestions that way too. Any questions on the test? There is class after the test. The test is short. Because it's objective, you either know it or you don't. My own philosophy for test taking, which may be wrong, is that your first answer is usually right. When you think it through, and this is a problem with honors students in particular, you're very smart. There's always 2 questions, on a 5-question list. There's one that's just plain stupid. You know it's not that one. Okay? Then if you read the stuff, it kind of usually comes down to maybe 2. And you can outsmart yourself by thinking it too much. So being really smart, and you guys are, you can actually overthink yourself into that. Go with your first gut answer. You're probably right. Now, you all know test taking better than probably anybody. You wouldn't be honor students if you didn't. That is, you developed the skill of taking tests somewhere along the line. I want to share with you some of our best alums may not have been good test takers either, but most of our good test takers are good alums too. So all right. You all set for the test? Are there any questions? Courtney?
So the test is much harder.
Courtney, again, I'm kind of hard of hearing. You've got a soft voice and you sit in the back. Could you shout when you speak with me? I'm so sorry to do that to you.
The test is on chapters 1 to 4.
Is that correct? I think so. What is chapter 4? Is that culture? That's then 1 through 3. 1 through 3. it does include not the continental Lescant model, but the Lescant model. And it includes this chart right here. Because this chart is the basis of much of your book. Risks in international business, we went over this. And currency risk, commercial risk, country risk, and we've described these, and now we're going to talk about cross-cultural risk. Any other questions before I start on cross-cultural? Yes, ma'am?
I just want to clarify, so from the book, if we didn't go over it in class, the one thing we kind of need to worry about are definitions.
I won't go so far as to say that, Emily.
Okay.
Read the chapters, but I will say it's a pretty safe thing to do. I'm not going to box myself in so that you can say, well, you know, if you read the chapter, it'll be there,
Okay.
or it'll be on a slide. But I may have asked for more than just the thing on the side. The thing on the side says make sure to read that paragraph,
Yeah.
not just memorize the thing on the side.
Okay.
So you understand?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not just the definition, but anything hanging out in the margin, you should make sure if you're skimming, you don't skim that part.
Okay.
That's really what I intend. And that'll come in later on the final exam, which is cumulative, and which you will probably have to write an essay, which might include some of these things.
Mhm.
So hopefully you'll remember them, or in your big report. Okay, so I think we're going to go over cross-cultural behavior now. And I think I assigned you to groups today, but I think I'm going to do that after the test next time. Because 2 people are out to receive an honor today. A couple of people are sick today who wrote me, and it just seems like it'd be better I did do it next class. I may have had that in mind anyway, I don't know. Gotta look, but okay. All right, so you'll have time to do that. I want to put everybody in a group. So cross-cultural issues. How is culture a factor in business? I mean, aren't we more and more alike? Those of you who've traveled abroad or just looked at movies, there's a Starbucks everywhere, literally everywhere within this, you know, within developed and much of the developing world. It's the same Starbucks. Okay, you know, the Louis Vuitton bag that is made in France is the same Louis Vuitton bag you see in the United States. It's the same Louis Vuitton. Its biggest market is China. So people of a certain class of a certain class and gender tend to buy a Louis Vuitton bag. Aren't we all alike? Are we all alike? How's culture a factor? Even. That's a real question. It's not on the test. It's intended to get a conversation going. So what do you think? Luke, you look like you want to say something.
Well, different cultures have different tastes. I mean, like over in the Middle East or like in Israel, they eat like falafel, you know.
Okay, so in Israel, people eat falafel. Actually, the entire Middle East eats falafel. Falafel is also very popular in Turkey. It's very popular in Lebanon. In fact, all of them claim it to be their national dish, which is kind of odd considering that people have really unique cultures, but they all claim a falafel as their national dish. So one thing is that. Falafels are exotic here. Let's go out and have Israeli or Middle East or Arabic food or something, or Turkish food. And it's like the average thing to go out and get there. Okay, that's one thing. Yes?
Oh, well, even if we take like Louis Vuitton bag that you're talking about, in like America, we might like different print or pattern or whatever, and it's like easier to come by, like more people have it. Where in other countries, the like colored one might be seen as higher class, and because there's a colored one, and there's tons of different shapes and styles.
So some of you feel comfortable talking about this. True, there are all these styles,
Yeah.
and it's true in certain markets. What is the best-selling American car in China? A U.S.-made car in China? It's Buick. You would never guess that from the U.S. market, where Buick's kind of down the line. But Buick is the number one. It is a high-quality car. It's what executives drive for limos. Buick. The colored or non-colored purse that you may disdain in one culture could easily be the one that is the main thing. And here's the thing about GM. I mean, they were looking at which line to get rid of. Get rid of Oldsmobile. Buick was on the chopping block, but then they looked and the Chinese turned out to love this thing. And there's no particular reason other than taste. I guess. I don't know. But there are things that are much more than just some superficial, because essentially the Buick and the Louis Vuitton bag are pretty similar. Falafel's a little different. Food tastes really do start to change. And there are differences, including religious variation on food, so that in Israel they have kosher McDonald's, and in across the border in Jordan they have halal McDonald's, and in India they have vegetarian McDonald's, but it's still the same principle. But what's in that bun is essentially different. I know there are some halal and kosher and vegetarian restaurants here too, but McDonald's being such a commonality is the point of a mass chain that has changed it even within mass culture. What else would it be affecting? Can you think of something? Yes?
The way that people interact, we're all kind of informal, at least in America, we're all kind of informal the way we talk to each other.
Okay. So the way people interact, there's a difference in formality. There's a difference in the way we address each other. There's a difference in how direct or indirect we are. Whether I call you Shane or I don't even know your last name, Mr. Pollock. Okay? So there's differences like that. Can you think of other things? I'll give you one other example. I think it's probably worth looking at. There actually slides in this somewhere. I should probably find it, but I'll talk about it anyway. Okay, so what is the most popular toy, mass-marketed toy of all time? Toy, not game, toy. It's Barbie. Barbie is remarkably successful. By the way, the toy market is one of the absolute most difficult markets to have a product with with longevity. Most products have fads within toys, and you may remember some of these: Power Rangers, or Pet Rocks, or Pokemon cards, or I forgot the little electronic thing that you kept alive on a little beeper.
Detachment.
Yeah, okay, and they don't all have to be from the U.S. They can come from other places. But Barbie appeals to a certain group of people, okay, within a certain class, but it has a mass appeal. Now, Barbie is actually quite expensive to make. By the way, Barbie is a U.S. concept. It's a U.S. company, Mattel, but it is generally manufactured elsewhere, but it still counts as a U.S. product. The end profit for the focal firm comes back to the U.S., even if a lot of Barbie is manufactured in China or in other countries. It doesn't have to be China either. But the end product. Now, where is the money in Barbie? Barbie actually costs almost as much for a Barbie as it costs to make a Barbie. All that hair has to be individually stuck in and tested. It's a toy, so if parts fall off and you swallow it as a 3-year-old or something, you can be in real trouble. The lawsuit value on that is high, protective value. She moves. She's got various parts. There's quality control. If the eye gets painted, on the cheek, it really devalues the toy. And the eye is very tiny, so it's not like the print in a Louis Vuitton bag. It's pretty big. It's got a range of places you could go. It's got a very specific little thing. It's got all sorts of colors on it. It's a very and it's sturdy. It's got to be tested for sturdiness. So Barbie not racking up much money on an individual Barbie. Where's the money come?
The accessories.
The accessories. A pair of Barbie shoes costs about $4. And they cost to manufacture about 1/400th of a penny. That's a bit of a markup. Now, the whole point for Barbies is not the doll, but the accessories. And she's got other accessories. Shoes are probably the greatest markup, but her purse and her little brush and her pool and her car and so forth. In her dream house, right? Okay, so here's Barbie. Now, what do you think, if the money is in that, right? First of all, how did Barbie get to be such an international success? And really, the money in Barbie's in the clothes. Can you imagine something a little off with Barbie? What does Barbie look like?
It's unrealistic.
She's unrealistic. By the way, Barbie all over the world is unrealistic and just as popular in virtually every culture you stick her in. The fact that she is anatomically incapable of standing, is nonetheless there. But what features does Barbie have? She's blonde. What color are her eyes?
Blue.
Blue. What color's her skin? Now, if you're playing with Barbie and you're dressing Barbie, the general principle behind Barbie in dressing her up is to play act that this could be you if you're a girl. Well, you're a boy, but mostly girls. Okay? What is wrong with Barbie on a global market? Yeah, she does not look like a Japanese girl at all. I mean, I'm not just talking about that she's physically, incapable of having a waist like that and holding herself up, or that there's something wrong with her feet, that she's always at that angle. But the reality is that she can't look that way. Now, Barbie, when it first started marketing internationally, had a success. Its first main markets out of the US were Canada, which is common, Britain, and Germany, and it was very successful in all of those places, with almost no modification. Same desire, same group of kids, same everything. Okay? As they tried to expand, one of the first places they expanded in the early 1980s, as the market was really growing, okay, was Japan. And Japan was a problem. Okay, one of the problems with Japan was what? Barbie was not culturally adapted to look like a little Japanese kid. Now, the thing that really thrust Barbie into the limelight in Japan, back in the United States, where they felt they had to do something about it, after all, shouldn't Japanese kids want to look like a blonde, blue-eyed American, whatever she is, okay? Was when they found out that when Barbie was first introduced, there were good sales. But they found out that the sales were not from little Japanese girls. Who was buying them that embarrassed Barbie into modification? Yeah, Japanese middle-aged men. Barbie business. Okay, perverts. Okay, all right. So this was an embarrassment because it hit both the Japanese and U.S. press as embarrassing. Clearly. So what they did was, for the Japanese market, they created a Midori doll. Midori is exactly like Barbie, except she doesn't have blue eyes and blonde hair. She has dark eyes and black hair, and her features are slightly more Asian, as in her eyes are not really that Asian shape, but they're not really that Western shape. Barbie's eyes are actually, they've actually gotten more almond shaped on both the Midori and the US version. If you go back and look at early Barbie, she's become, part of that is because then you could just change the eye color without having to worry about the eye shape, which costs money. So she's got something in between, some mid-Pacific eye shape. But in any case, that's what she's got. At first she didn't. At first she had pretty Asian eyes, okay? And remember, it's worth all this money because you don't want perverts doing it. What you really want is people to dress the Barbie. You want to sell those shoes. And Midori was quite successful. I actually have the slides of all this. I should have brought it, but I won't. Midori was quite successful. And one of the things that became apparent was that people were bringing Midori dolls back to the United States from business trips to Japan. Who was bringing these back? I'm sorry?
Maybe the Japanese population living in America?
Well, the entire Asian population was bringing it back. Okay, so particularly to the West Coast, where there's fairly substantial Chinese and Japanese and even Filipino. It doesn't look quite the same, but it was better than the other Barbie. And the other thing that they found, and this is what got them interested, was that people were buying Midori for the United States market who were not Asian, because Barbie then had a friend in a multicultural environment that was the world of Seattle or San Francisco or Los Angeles. This led to the thought that maybe there were other Barbies, and they started doing really elaborate special Barbies. The next one was Hong Kong Barbie. The Hong Kong Barbie was coming out for Asian New Year, Chinese New Year, with extraordinarily elaborate costumes that then created the concept of the collector Barbie across different national sets. I think Cathay Pacific sponsored it or something. In any case, there was there was that. And then they started to make other Barbies, including an African American Barbie, or black Barbie, which sold, and people who were not black actually bought. I've forgotten her name. That's why I should have brought my slides. But in any case, whatever her friend's name was, people were also buying that. So they would have this going on. Later, for the Latin American market, they created a Consuela Barbie. It was not really, it's a Barbie product, but it's Consuela. But the thing about Consuela, and whatever the little black kid is, and whatever the other ones, they all could wear the clothes. That's the big thing. It's the same shoes or Louis Vuitton bag. That is what we call unification fragmentation. Now, I'm going to give you that term. It's not on the test, but I want you to know it. This is something that a guy from Indiana University came up with. All the way back in the early 70s. He said, about unification fragmentation theory, his name was John Fairweather, and he's considered the father of international business. When he first started teaching, he was put in the annex building for MIT across the street from the main building because what he was doing wasn't important enough. He shared a room with a guy named W.E. Deming, who you may have heard of, who created quality control and essentially just-in-time marketing and so forth, management and so on. It's truly amazing. They shared an office. Both of them were marginalized. Fairweather went to Indiana, Deming went to Japan, and they revolutionized a lot when we look at it. What Fairweather said was that as cultures are different and as we interact with each other more, you find out that on the one hand, certain values are going to be there all the way across. That is, there is a need for kids who are between lower middle class and rich, that is, to have a toy that they can dress if they're a girl of a certain age. Not all girls, and certainly some boys do. I mean, there's this whole thing behind G.I. Joe, etc. But I mean, that was an extension of Barbie, the action figure. But the reality is that is a unification. Women of a certain age and class will want to show off in a mass consumer society the same product. That's why there's a Louis Vuitton purse. Elite societies tend to be quite different. But as mass marketing, as wealth occurs, the elites lose their power. And the mass market is actually the one buying. When you say, the French have been bemoaning this for the last 100 years, that culture is dying and so on. What's actually dying is the elitist part of France. All of those French people eating McDonald's, previously, the average farmer, the average factory worker couldn't go sit in a French bistro like the intellectual elite. They're looking for the same reason you're looking. They're working hard. They want to get some quick food because they don't have, and they want to have some quality control in it. It's not an attack on French culture. The reality, things that people don't want, as in the Barbie doll that is not modified, they don't buy. But when you open it up to the masses, the needs of the masses are remarkably similar. That's unification. Fragmentation is where it starts to break down to need to modify the unified product for the fragmented market. As in, Barbie needs to look like the kid playing with it, more or less. As in, the food that you're offering is, you can have mass market octopus, and they do all over East Asia, but the reality is that it just isn't going to make it in the United States. We have too much of a cultural aversion to octopus, other than throwing it on the ice. Okay, so there are various things on that level. Okay, so what we're going to look at is the fragmentation part. But I want you to keep in mind that unification is always part of this. The risk, cross-cultural risk, is where you misjudge the fragment, thinking that what you're doing is universal. And that is a problem. So that's cross-cultural risk. The LESCAM models we talked about is language, environment technology, social organization, contexting, which is how much of what you say is what you mean, authority conception, how you view the boss, labor relations, nonverbal behavior, and the understanding of time. Language. We often overstate the importance of language, especially in the United States where we are largely monolingual. Indeed, there's a joke that I've heard in multiple languages all over the world. What do you call someone who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. What do you call someone who speaks 2 languages?
Bilingual.
And what do you call someone who speaks 1 language? American. Yes, that's right. So there's this joke. Many people feel that Americans are somehow genetically, in some cases, or just culturally unable to learn other languages, and it's true. Okay, only about 20% of the United States speaks a second language, and of these, the vast majority are either immigrants or the children of immigrants. Now, several of you know another language and are not immigrants or children of immigrants, but the reality is it's a very small number. And it is a huge disadvantage for U.S. business because language opens up the world, not because it's the culture, but because it gives you access to seeing another culture. Language, in many respects, is a window to another culture. You'll watch the movies from France if you speak French. You may get a different news perspective if you speak Korean and watch Korean news. That kind of thing. That's not the cultural aspect. That's language as a tool. Language is a channel of communication. It's part of business, but it's not the culture itself. What is the part of the culture is the nature of each language. In the way that the way a language is put together starts to affect things. For example, in Japanese, you speak Japanese, right?
Yes.
Okay, in Japanese, where does the verb come? How would you say Kenji ate the sushi?
ケンジが寿司を食べました。そう
Yeah.
ケンジ。
Yeah, so it goes subject, object, verb. Japanese is a backloaded language. So is Korean. German and Russian have a choice. Unless you're Bavarian, you always throw it in that. But anyway, you can throw the verb to the end. Or second place. You have a choice, though. Ich habe etwas, gewissen. Yeah. So it depends on if you're using a helping word or something. So, desu ne? Desu ne? Okay. So, why does it make a difference if English is subject, verb, object? Why does it matter that the verb can come at the end? Subject, object, verb. Kenji ate the sushi. Okay, I with you on this subject fully agree versus, versus I with you on this subject fully disagree. As opposed to I agree with you fully on this subject, which is normal English, or I disagree with you fully on this subject. What difference does it make if disagree is in the second position instead of at the end? Avery, what do you think?
It's just how people perceive it.
How? How does that change things? What difference does it make if the verb comes at the end? Can you, for me, at this point, an example give?
From what I guess, maybe it's
Loud.
from what I think, maybe it makes the sentence more like make the tone more smooth and just make.
Okay, it affects tone. That's true. I'm not sure what smooth means, but it does affect how we're doing something. Courtney, you want to say?
In Spanish, every time we have like words out of place, like the verb is such one place, they say it doesn't sound right, like it sounds bad to their
weird.
Yes, and that's true for every language. So if you put the verb in the wrong place in Japanese, it doesn't sound right either. Okay, that's universal. You're totally right. But what about not just that? Not that it's wrong in the wrong place for a language. It's true. But how does that affect how we communicate if your subject verb in the beginning versus subject object, all the commentary, and then the verb?
It depends on it affects the inflection of the sentence, and also you have to pay full attention to the sentence because you don't know what the verb is until the very end. So keep the attention during the whole sentence.
Did you hear what she said? Put it in another way. What did she just say you have to do if the verb comes at the end? Yep.
She basically said that if the verb comes at the end, you have to pay attention to the whole sentence to understand the whole meaning of the sentence and not just like pick up the verb and just run.
In English, Spanish, French, Romanian, Italian, all of these languages, it's subject, verb, object. If you have subject, verb right in the beginning, everything at the end of the sentence is commentary. All the guts you already know if I agree or don't agree right in the beginning. How does that affect things? Yep,
You
Emily?
know your answer right away.
You
Like,
know
so
your
you say,
answer.
I disagree, like, I'm just gonna tune you out the rest of the time.
Okay, one is tune you out. What else do we do?
Or then like start preparing your own argument.
Yes, we start preparing our own argument. We don't listen to the end of the sentence. And what do we often do in all of these languages that you don't do in German, you don't do in Japanese? Interrupt. You can't interrupt in a sentence where you don't know what the meaning is yet. I don't know if you agree or disagree until I get there, so I have to watch. In English or Spanish or French or any of those other ones, where like it's English, you interrupt with a purpose. You show you're on the same page. I'm sharing your idea. You interrupt because I'm tuning you out. I don't want to hear the rest of it. I'm going to react. You interrupt to show you're paying attention. In some languages, such as in Spanish, you actually make a little twist on the words. It's a play of words all the time, both in Spanish and French. Often it's got a little sexual overtone of your friends. You can do that even in the workplace. That's another thing. What is the role of sexual innuendo in a workplace? You know, that's part of the language too. But here we've got that. So we don't really know what the sense is. So interruptive behavior in Japanese or in German or in Korean is seen as impulsive or childish. Because only children would interrupt. And you wouldn't want to do business with either of those. And what happens if people don't interrupt while you're talking? They just listen, they just sit there and watch you until you're done, and there's a long pause after you're done speaking. How do we respond to that?
I think they're not interested.
We think they're not interested. And therefore, we think they're bored, unenthusiastic, leaden, dim-witted, or just basically cold. And that's all based on the nature of the language. There's no such thing as a complete sentence in Japanese. Sushi ate Kenji. Sushi Kenji ate. Or Kenji sushi ate, rather. Okay? It's still a complete sentence, and actually politer just to look at Kenji and then say sushi ate. In English, sushi ate doesn't make sense, but in Japanese, it's a complete sentence. And I have avoided putting the blame on Kenji. We all know Kenji. He's the kind of guy who would eat the sushi before everybody else. But I'm not going to say it. I just look at him, say sushi ate, and it's a complete sentence. Interestingly, in Japanese, I don't have to have any words. I could say, look at Kenji, look at the plate, and then say ate. And that's a complete sentence still in Japanese. Now, I'm not positive it was sushi on the plate. I know it's Kenji, and whatever was on that plate was likely eaten by him. But you know what? I can also look at the plate, look at Kenji, look at the plate, and then look down. Because I don't know if Kenji put it in his pocket, honestly, and I can drop any part of speech, and that's still a complete sentence in Japanese, which also starts to say, how much are we intuiting from context? So that's part of that. The nature of the language is a factor. Whether things have, they decline or don't decline by number, and so forth. If the writing system is visual, then it's pictures, as in kanji in Japanese or hanja in Chinese, or whether it is alphabetical. which means you can sound everything out, but there's no image. Languages that have pictograms, languages that have characters are more concrete, more visual. So we've got linguistics, three things here that is also part of this, and that is, what is the nature of the language used? One is the grammatical structure, the actual nature of it. The other one is we have something called grammatical structure. We did linguistic equivalence. There's no such thing as a direct translation. Those of you who have another language know this. There are things you can say in one language that you really can't say quite right in another language. Can anybody think of an expression in one language that doesn't translate into English from your own experience? Yes, sir.
When I was in Spain, we were trying to explain to them the concept of a knock-knock joke, and it just was, you completely couldn't.
Okay, the concept of a knock-knock joke. That's actually more contexting, which is the nature of humor, because knock-knock jokes, and this is important, are based on puns, usually, and puns don't translate, because the words for the things are different. And in some languages, like Japanese, which has the highest number of homonyms in the entire world for languages, those are words like bear, bear, and bear, or two, two, and two that are, spelled differently. They have different meanings with the same word. So in Japanese, there's so many of them that those aren't particularly funny anymore. They got to be rare enough in the language for it to matter.
Or it's so awful you have to laugh to get past it.
You have to laugh to get past it, yes. There's that too. All right, but yes, absolutely. That's one thing, is humor doesn't translate. What is an expression? Can you think of it? One from Spanish, from Chinese? Go ahead.
Yeah, if I want to say something, when I see somebody that I didn't see for a long time, and I might say, oh, you're a little bit fat now. But in this sentence, when we say fat, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're fat, like very fatty. We just say maybe something like you're cute or you're
Okay.
adorable.
So the phrase in Chinese for being fat has multiple meanings that it doesn't have in English. In Spanish, how do you say simpático in English? Do you know? Well, it doesn't translate, really, does it? Simpático, it's kind of nice, but it's more than that. It's stronger. Okay, or Gemütlichkeit. There's no way to fully translate certain phrases from one language to another. We borrow many of them. Okay, so hands-off government, we don't say hands-off government, which is a little clear. We say laissez-faire. We borrow the term sometimes. And you can see those things. Another one is linguistic relativism. Now that's something we can't prove, but linguistic relativism is the concept that language shapes reality. I gave you an example the other day, I think, when I talked about Italian having two shades of blue in their spectrum. So they have one word for light blue and one word for dark blue. So the shades of a dark light blue is easy to say in Italian and hard to get across in English, because we don't have the words for it. We can get to any concept, but is it easier in one language to do it than the other? And the other is that there are associations, like knock-knock jokes. When I hear knock, my mind in English runs to knock-knock. In French, when I hear frappe, I don't think knock-knock. Okay, it means knock, but I don't know what it means. It does not associate with a joke to me. In fact, it begins to associate with a drink. Okay, so we've got different things that link to the languages because the language themselves are a series of associations. And so that associative value shifts. For example, how do you say?
Man in Japanese, otoko.
And can you see in here that that does not actually equal man per se?
Yeah, it's two parts. Well,
To start with, it's two parts. Secondly, you can kind of see it. There's also kind of a rice field in there too. But you can see the person working the field, that's a man. We have an association that goes with a man working the field, even if you're not that. The concept that the laborer in the field would be male, there's all this reinforced by that. They don't match. Hombre does not mean man. Hombre is used, what we now use, hey man, that came from the Spanish originally, but hombre's got other associations. They don't fully link because they're there. So linguistic realities, distinctions in one language are non-transferable. Words encode concepts so that they are unique to each language. Yes, ma'am.
So when you say that man is not equal to man, you mean for the linguistic?
From the linguistic level, they are not the same. Even though they are the same meaning, the association of, for example, man does not have anything to do with working in a field. But the visual association of the character does have a rice field in it. You can't get away with the association of a rice field with a man as soon as you see the word. So there's an associational value that is different. Yes?
Do you mean like the connotations of the words, like house versus home?
Yes.
Like that? Is that?
The connotations are different. So in English, for example, we have a bunch of different words for the same thing. House versus home. House versus mansion. Okay? In French, we don't have that. We have home meaning being in the process of being in a home, but you really just have house, maison, where we get mansion from. Our association in English with mansion being classy and house being lowly is from the French conquest of England in 1066. So the lowest level French person lived in a maison, which was the Norman accent, is mansion. And the richest guy in England who's speaking Anglo-Saxon would have lived in a house. Wie sagt man Haus auf Deutsch? House. So we have linguistic associations we're not even aware of where that overtone comes. There's a difference when I say green versus verdant in English. In French, there's only one way to say it. Verdant, vert. Grün in German. It's, but in English we have associations based on something that happened all the way in the 11th century that carry over to a class association of words. That's not there in German or French. Why not? It's the associative value of language. For example, that's a rice field. That's a guy's arm. You put them together, you get someone working the rice field. That's Chinese too. So in Chinese, do you know this expression?
Yeah.
Tell us about it.
For men to work on the field and for a woman work for wait.
To weave, yes. Now, it's becoming sexist. People aren't saying it as much in China, but you know it. Okay.
It's one of description for traditional Chinese agriculture.
Right? But if I said men work, women, almost no one who speaks a language other than Chinese would fill in weave. To start with, in English tradition, weaving is a man's job. Sewing was a woman's job, but the weavers were men. That's what Scottish industry and Northern English industry was based on. It's so big an occupation that it's a very common surname in English from a profession. Okay? So we have a different association. When I hear the word nan, I start nan. I have a different association than I do in English. Let's look at man. In Chinese, the word for man is gender linked. It means male. Nan is male.
Actually, it's yuan. That means you can say both gender. If you say yuan, that means man and woman.
Man and woman.
Yeah.
Then I'm wrong. Okay. No, that's a different word though.
Yeah, it's a different word.
Right. But the common word nan, that's male.
No. Yeah, common word. Yeah.
Okay, is male. The common word for man in English, male is an uncommon word, it's a technical word, okay, is man. And man has the association that you're describing which is both male and female. For example, the Luxembourg photographer, I don't know if you know Edward Steichen, but he's probably the most famous Luxembourg American. He's one of the great photographers of all time, and it's the UN Heritage Site in Luxembourg now, but he was living in the United States. It's called The Family of Man, and on the cover is a woman. Because it's not gender related per se, unless you make it so. That association means that men and women alike with the word man, referring to all people, it's not the same as not. Man does not live by. If I say that in China, most people can't fill that in, even if they speak English. Even if you are not Christian, you can say by bread alone on that. You may not even know where it came from, but it's so associated that when you hear man, somewhere in your mind is an associative link to bread, not working in a rice field. They're not the same. I already gave you grammatical structure. We'll move on. There's also the role of cultural attachment. Which language I use starts to matter. If I speak French and you speak French, and your first language is French and my first language is English, but you don't speak any English, it makes sense for us to speak French. If I speak French and I speak English, and you speak English and know French, it makes sense to speak English. If we both speak French and we both speak English, whose language do we use? The one you feel comfortable with? Okay, I'm more comfortable in French, you're more comfortable in English, which one do we use? I am as equally comfortable in French as you are in English, and I'm as equally uncomfortable in the other language. Whose language do we use? Which one? Why? Is it your language? No, I mean, is it? Yeah, well, one is that English is a universal language, and we can play that and say what you're supposed to. But there is a question that comes. If I'm in the United States, as a French speaker who speaks English, I'll speak English. If I'm an English speaker who speaks French in France, I'll speak French. That makes some sense. We can do that. What if I'm in Iceland? We are meeting in Iceland. They speak neither French nor English there as the first language. Whose language do we use? And if you want to throw English out because it's too popular, let's say you got Icelandic and Danish. Which one are you going to use? Well, I don't know, but that is part of an attachment. The answer to that question has to do with cultural attachment. If you speak English in Korea, first of all, very few people speak English in Korea, although it is the second language. Okay, but there's almost no resentment to speaking English. And if you speak Korean in Korea and you're not Korean, doors open up for you because you're not expected to. They wish you could because the vast majority of people can't understand anything but Korean, but you have made a special effort because the only people in the world who speak Korean are Koreans. Now, if you're an American who speaks Korean, a little Korean, even just a little Korean in Korea, that matters a lot more in Korea than a Korean who speaks only a few words of English in the United States. We don't praise a Korean for knowing a few words of English when she comes here, and yet you will get praised in Korea for knowing a few words of Korean. That is an expectation attached to a language. Let's add another level. If you speak Spanish in Spain, that's cool. It's a good thing. It's not held against you if you don't, if you're an English speaker, especially from the US. If you speak English in Mexico, if you speak Spanish in Mexico, as an American, there's a difference based on history. Why? There's a lot of prejudice against Spanish speakers in the United States. If you're Japanese and you speak Spanish in Mexico, you're supposed to. After all, that's the largest Spanish-speaking country. It's a major power and it's a big trading partner of Japan's. But if you're from the US and you speak even a few words of Spanish in Mexico, you can't be one of the prejudiced lunkheads. The Japanese don't have a reputation of being prejudiced against Mexicans. In fact, the relationship's pretty new. The U.S. has had one as long as we've had the two countries side by side. We took the entire northern third of the country in a war that was absolutely an unjust war. And you can look into it. It's not one you can feel all that proud of. So much so that when you read the sign at the Alamo in Spanish and in English, the content is different. Okay. There's a role of cultural attachment that means that in Greece, people expect you to have some Greek. Greece is a country whose language is a language of culture, which is why with this tiny population, there's still an awful lot of people because the Germans and the British learn Greek as part of their education. So there's all these various things. Is there a war? A Japanese-speaking Korean in Korea has a lot more to make up for than an American who liberated Korea. A Japanese-speaking English in Mexico is not given any, it doesn't have the possibility that it's because you hate Mexicans that you never learned Spanish. Whereas in the U.S., it very much is. The Japanese mispronounces a Mexican's name almost certainly did it because they couldn't pronounce the name. In American, you always have that question, did they do it on purpose? Okay, so we've got those things. Attitudes towards the use of the home language. Do doors open up as an English-speaking person going to speak some Korean in Korea? Or do they, and are they very receptive? Or do they say, as I speak Dutch, do they say, when I'm speaking the Netherlands, actually I have to ask people to please let me try and speak Dutch or I'll never get to practice? Because the general question they ask is, why did you study Dutch? What purpose is there in that? Until you persist at which time doors open up. So is there an initial acceptance or an initial reservation? Is there a resentment to speaking the other language? Based on history? Based on whatever? Based on ignorance. The U.S. is very resistant to people speaking languages other than English. What is the attitude towards the use of English? Is English the world language? Is English a technical skill? Is English resented? Those are questions that change by culture, man.
I just want to mention that this summer my boyfriend went to China and he went to an English institution and they paid him like $50 per hour just teaching me English.
Yep. There's a huge demand all over East Asia, especially if you're outside of Beijing or Shanghai or Guangdong in China. If you're outside of Tokyo or Kyoto in Japan, you're outside of Seoul in Korea, because there just aren't enough English speakers to teach. So we have Chinese speakers teaching other Chinese speakers English when they don't speak English very well. A native speaker is much sought after, but quite honestly, if I'm going to Asia, I'm probably going to Tokyo or Beijing, not Seoul. So there's less in Seoul. And if I'm going to Korea, I'll stay in Seoul, not somewhere else. So the smaller the town, you can get yourself really good jobs. There's a huge demand for it. By the way, do you know there are more English speakers in China right now than there are Americans? They don't speak it well. Okay, we're not talking fluent, but people with exposure to English is now 400 million people in China.
Now we started at one kindergarten.
Yeah, but that's exposure. There's 1.3 billion Chinese. That's still only a third of the country with some exposure, but that is more than the whole population of the United States. English as a global language for business is dominated by non-English speakers. The majority of people speaking English for business are not native English speakers. And we've already gone over choice of language. All of that's culture and language. And then there are issues of what are the names like from country to country? What's the name order? Do I use first names versus, do I use personal names versus surnames? Do I use nicknames? How are titles used? How formal am I? How many titles are there? Engineer is a very common title in a lot of languages. It sounds funny to say, Engineer Smith in English, but it sounds totally normal in Spanish or German. Well, Spanish, German's getting a little unusual. Section Manager Smith is totally normal in Japanese. We don't even have it. It sounds absolutely bizarre to be section manager, whatever. Over 60% of Koreans have one of 4 surnames. Isn't that amazing? So, I'm sorry, one of 5 surnames. So, well over a quarter of Korea have the surname of Kim. This means memorizing a person's entire name is extremely important. Rare names are more common than Smith is in English in Korea. So there's that. What about accents? When your boyfriend went to China to teach, he had an American accent, which is a preferred accent than
Yeah,
every boyfriend.
actually, it's very interesting. They prefer American accent than like, for example, people from
Jamaica.
Jamaica.
Yeah, which is who usually ending up in the places they can't get someone else. It doesn't matter if you're a native English speaker, but we got Australians and Jamaicans and people with pretty strong accents for other English speakers to understand. You don't get Britons and Americans too often in the small towns. I'll take anybody.
But they will still pay more for
They will still pay because it's a native English speaker.
I mean, for American accent.
Oh, they'll pay more for the American accent, right. Whose English do you use? Okay, in the European Union, this is a real question because there are 2 countries whose first language is English. And they don't speak the same English. Whose English is the proper one if you're paying EU money to learn English? What are the 2 countries in the European Union that speak English as their first language?
I would guess Germany.
Germany is first language is German.
Okay.
UK
No,
and Ireland, right. Okay, and they have strongly different accents and histories in which they don't like each other. And I want to share something else. Okay, people in Northern Ireland are just as much UK as people in England. The north of England sounds quite different. Actually, I find Northumbrish, the northernmost accent in England, extremely hard to understand. And while I do pretty well with Scottish accents, most people from the United States can't follow it. Whose English is the main one? What does it mean if we're all learning Oxbridge English, the King's English, the Queen's English, when very few people actually speak that? What happens when you take the BBC, one of the most important news agencies in the world in terms of getting your news, and you start, because of politics, allowing accents that are non-Oxbridge on it? So now we have Scottish and Irish accents on the BBC, let alone Indian and Nigerian and so forth. What about degree of fluency? One of the questions, which language do we speak, that you correctly answered, Anthony, was which one you feel more comfortable with? And that's true. If I am more comfortable speaking English and you are speaking French, okay, we go with the one which is the greatest fluency, but there's a problem. If I've got 100% fluency in my native language and you've got 80% fluency in the second language, there's a 20% loss. What happens if we're both speaking English as a second language? We both got an 80%, we're good, fluency, really fluent people have about 80% concept, okay? But you're 20% and my 20%. We have a possibility of missing 4 out of every 10 words. Now, let's talk about the people your boyfriend was actually teaching in China who might have 30% English. And they're doing pretty well by Chinese standards. They may be the only one in the village who can actually speak any English. Now try and communicate. All of this starts to matter, and that affects culture. And that's part of this cross-cultural risk. And then, who do I get to translate? Most people who go into translation because of what? Because they love car parts? Because they love financial terminology? Why do most people study a language? They love the language, and what do you read in the language? What is culture? All of this is culture. You're not talking culture with a small c. What are you talking about? Why do people study Spanish? What do you end up studying? Literature. You read Spanish so you can read Don Quixote. Most people who go on to become really fluent in Spanish did it because their appeal was through literature or movies or something. They're not going into it because they are interested in anti-lock braking systems. And yet that's where the demand is. As an engineer, I don't speak any other language, and I need to communicate about how to manufacture anti-lock braking systems in Mexico. Now I hire somebody who loves Don Quixote. There weren't even cars back then. And this, so what you end up with are people who resent being in a position where they're not studying literature, they're talking about anti-lock braking system. Unless there's a new class of people, language for special purposes. Okay, when you have a translator, if people don't know what pharmacokinetics is in your own language, chances are, if you hire a translator, she doesn't know what it is either in the other language. If you're in a specialized area like pharmaceuticals, you have to say what pharmacokinetics is before they can translate it. You need to spend time with the translator. You need to get an expert translator, not just somebody's kid speaks Spanish or whatever it is. Okay, environment and technology. We're done with language now. That's not all of it. If you're interested in this, I got lots more you can read. But let's take a look. I would say that this is all out of my book anyway. So out of 5 categories where the environment begins to shape the culture. One of them is climate. How does climate shape a culture?
It shapes like what you would wear.
Shapes what you would wear. Although ironically, some people in the hottest climate, Singapore, wear full suits. So go figure. Okay? But it can affect what you wear. Yes?
Like the activities that you do.
Like what?
Well, if you're in a cold environment, you might ski a lot or something.
Okay, so what you could do for recreation, right? Why would the university close in the United States? Snow day. Can you even begin to explain that concept in Singapore, where the coldest it gets is 85 degrees?
No, I could not.
Okay, why do businesses close in Singapore? The monsoon. Okay, where you can drop, 20 inches of rain in a day. I don't know if you know what that looks like, but that is a remarkable amount of water. It is as if you are standing under a waterfall, but it is the entire distance that you can see. And it doesn't matter how big the sewers are, you got to back up until it stops. Okay? So that's one thing, that kind of thing. Natural disasters are another, whether or not there's tornadoes, which you find Europeans don't have tornadoes or hurricanes, they're all very worried about it when they come here, and we're afraid of monsoons or whatever because we don't have them. It's not just that stuff, though. It's what you take in stride. You can see the difference here in the United States. My daughter lives in Virginia. Richmond Airport was closed 2 years ago because it had 1 inch of snow. Kept her from coming home for the holidays because the airport closed for 1 inch. In Michigan, that's part of the culture. Okay, topography. What does that mean? Yeah, valleys, mountains, and so on. How does having a big flat area versus a bunch of valleys and mountains make a difference?
Depends on what manufacturing things you can have there, agriculture. It depends on what is in that area.
Yeah, well, one is the natural resources. We'll get to that, whether they're there. But the other is just movement of goods over that. It is much easier to move over a big flat area than over a bunch of mountains or through mountains or whatever. One of the reasons why Europe had so many different countries, in the 1600s, Europe had something like 850 different countries. It only became more consolidated now. Countries were mostly the size of Liechtenstein or Luxembourg. Luxembourg was actually one of the biggest powers at that time. Catch that. Okay? So we've got this massive thing because they're all broken up by natural barriers. China is a giant unified nation because essentially it's one gigantic flat plain. It has so few natural barriers it had to build one to prevent foreigners from coming in, the Great Wall. Whether or not you have passage to the sea. Rivers that are slow moving, like the Rhine, had a lot to do with how Germany developed. As opposed to rivers like the Amazon, which are so strong that you can't even go upstream. Or like the Congo, which is so turbulent that it's not possible to take ship traffic on either direction. Almost everything sinks on the continent. It's all just tangles of rocks and fast-moving waters, and not to mention that there's also things that eat you along the way. Okay, so we've got topography can form some of that. Also, just the straight size of your country. So we got the population size. 400 million people is a tiny fraction, right? It's not even half of China speak some English, which is larger than the whole population of the United States. A third of India is middle class by U.S. standards. 2/3, at least 1/3, is in utter poverty, and another third is probably in utter poverty but doesn't recognize it. But we're dealing with a third of 1.1 billion people. That means its market is bigger than the United States'. So just straight population size, 10% of the Indian market is worth going into. 10% of the Luxembourg market is not. Unless, of course, you're selling, diamonds or something like that, a very high value thing. Population density and space usage. How much space, first of all, how flat open is it? What is considered a short distance in Michigan is considered a massive distance in Europe. Driving to Jackson and back is a day trip here. Driving to the equivalent of Jackson in Germany is very difficult to conceptualize. Doing so in the Netherlands, that's an overnight. Well, the Netherlands, it used to be overnight. Better say Switzerland. Population density and space usage. I told you about the watermelons, didn't I? Can I tell this group about watermelons? Okay, so how much does a watermelon cost here, right? In the summer? $5, $6, right? Big old watermelon, right? How much does a watermelon cost in Japan? In Tokyo? Any idea?
Not really, but probably less.
Yeah, about $45. Now I want to share with you, Japanese love watermelon. So do we. Why does it cost so much there? They do have square ones. Actually, in Mexico, they developed first the little round ones as an answer, and now they grow them in boxes so they're square. You can buy square watermelons. Why? What's going on there? What?
They don't have enough space.
They don't have enough space. The cost of the watermelon in a store, watermelon's got a short shelf life, the cost of the watermelon in a store takes up so much room that you have to pay for the square meters of it. Space is almost free in Michigan. In Japan, we're dealing with a population that is the size of the United States west of the Mississippi, shoved into an area the size of California, of which 2/3 is uninhabited. 1/3 is uninhabitable, and 1/3 most people don't want to live in. There's every reason to like Hokkaido, but it's not very well populated. Okay, so now we've got that, right? Availability of natural resources, and someone said that. Whether or not you got oil makes a difference in how much oil costs. The United States is very rich in a natural resource that's extremely expensive in the Middle East. What is it? Water. We have water all over the place. Water is very expensive in the Middle East. Middle East has got a lot of a resource we need more of, probably, or it's changing, but that's oil. So you can start to see what the level of natural resources. In Japan, literally everything that's manufactured there has to be imported. They have no natural resources at all. So it starts to say whether or not you scrap and rebuild, or whether you have to use things, like measure twice, cut once. Which is why quality control is so high in a place like Japan, and not all that important in the U.S. Because the actual cost of the natural resources is lower. And with that, we'll pick it up next time. Is this interesting? Okay, guys. We'll see you next class. We've got a test. Come on time. We'll start right in the beginning.